They were small, but I knelt down and quickly dug out a heap of coal. I took a part of it down with me, and a part I gave to the Eskimos for the loan of the tools. Down below I collected some wood, loaded it with the coal on the sledge, and drove off in high spirits. This time I went back along the ice, because the tundra was too bumpy, and by this time there was not enough snow for such a heavy load. When I had reached my home quarters, I pitched a tent, set up a stove. I had tea and sugar, and I made plenty of tea, fried some fish, had a feed till I was fit to burst, made a fire, and slept soundly until the morning. In the morning I considered whether I was to remain in that spot or move nearer to the Eskimos. That day I stayed there, and rested and fed. But early on the morning of the next day I harnessed the reindeer, and we raced along the ice at a full tilt to the cape, under which there was wood and coal. There I found a quiet nook in a shelter under the cliffs, pitched a tent, and so I began to live there like a regular polar hermit, having made up my mind to wait there till the ice melted, and a whaling ship appeared on the scene. After the first night, which I spent under the cliffs, I took all the bags which I had with me and set out on to the rock to fetch the coal which I had carried down on the sledge. Within a day I had such a large pile that it lasted until the time when the sea opened. Then I proceeded to the places where wood was lying, which had drifted from the Siberian mainland, and I set up a large wooden fence around the tent. Now at last I felt comfortable. I used to go on expeditions to the mountains, hunting for game. There was not much, and it was only now and then that I shot a polar hare. This was rather nasty food. The meat had a fishy flavor, and I cursed at every mouthful, but I could not pick and choose, because I had nothing else. One day I went back to the little old man, called him out of the hole, and told him that I was now a neighbor of his. I invited him to come and visit me in my tent. There I showed him all my belongings. He was tremendously pleased. He kept smiling, and was filled with astonishment. I told him that I was eating nothing but hares, and that they had already made me feel bad. He thereupon suggested that on the next day the Eskimos would go fishing with me, and that we should have enough food. He said he would show me how to do it, but that I must help them to make a hole in the ice. I promised him that I would, and was delighted to think that I should now have a change of diet. On the next day I went out on the ice with the Eskimos. He showed me the place where the cutting had to be done, and I at once set to work with my axe. This was not an easy job. I had already dug down nearly 2 yards in the ice, and still found nothing. I went on cutting deeper and deeper, and at last I was afraid that I should slip right in and perish miserably. The little man, who was watching me from above, and could not get over his astonishment at the smart way I did the job, saw the reason for my alarm, and brought me a small axe with a very long handle. At the time he brought the other Eskimos along, so I climbed out of the hole and went on cutting through the hole with the small axe. Before very long there were signs of water. I quickly widened the opening, and now we all waited eagerly to see whether any fish would appear in the water below. After scarcely a quarter of an hour, water began to ripple. I saw the silvery bellies of fish wriggling about. I shouted for joy. The little man with the other Eskimos immediately put some small nets on a long pole and began to draw the fish out. I now noticed for the first time how weak these people were. They drew out only 1 or 2 fish at a time, and that was enough to tire them. When I saw this, I borrowed a net from them and began to draw out fish with such speed and in such numbers that a fine pile of them were soon wriggling about on the ice. They all looked at me in amazement, and then moved away a little. They were certainly afraid that a terribly strong giant had come among them. One of the Eskimos ran off and brought some neighbors along, and pointed out to them how many fish I had drawn up on the ice in a few moments. Their eyes started out of their heads. Suddenly they all joined hands and began to caper around me in a kind of joyful dance. I stood in their midst and felt overcome with joy and emotion. Now my hunger was a thing of the past. I brought my reindeer along, and took away a great part of the catch, and now began a royal banquet. With the whalers to the far north. Days passed, and gradually I began to feel quite at home. The ice cracked noisily, the spring flood tide set in and swept away the ice coating of the ocean with a huge clatter. The water poured out over the ice floes, the cracks grew broader, and the sea began to splash against the cliffs. It was warm. July arrived. Then, one day, at the beginning of July, I saw on the skyline of the open sea, a whaling ship, which had anchored near the island. Some people were pulling off from the side in a small boat. I waited impatiently, but they moved away to the other side of the cape, and I lost sight of them. But this did not disappoint me. The Eskimos told me that every year the captains of whalers came that way and brought them provisions in exchange for furs. The captain would be sure to climb up as far as the Eskimos from the other side. And right enough, before very long, a group of people came down the slope with an Eskimo who had told the captain that there was a man down below anxious to be taken on as a deckhand. The captain came straight up to me. He was a Russian and looked very stern. I saluted him. He took close stock of me and asked abruptly, "Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you want here?" I told him that I'd come there on foot from Krasnoyarsk, and that I was anxious to settle down in Novaya Zemlya, or Franz Joseph Land. The captain laughed harshly. "Do you fancy those parts as much as all that?" "Yes, I've made up my mind to stay here for the rest of my days and live as a polar settler." "What is your occupation?" "I'm a locksmith and a sailor. I've been waiting for a whaling vessel." The captain reflected for a moment. "All right." He then said, "You say that you're a locksmith as well? You can come whaling with me this summer, and you'll get clothes and food for the autumn, provisions for all next winter. Is that all right?" I said that I knew nothing about catching whales, and that in fact I had never even seen one of those animals. "That doesn't matter. It isn't hard. You'll get the hang of it the very first time. All you have to do is to obey orders." I reflected a little. "And where are you going to? Where will you drop me in the return journey?" "We're headed straight for the islands of New Siberia. You can leave your reindeer on the tundra there, and on the way back we'll drop you there. There are Eskimos and white people living there, and you won't be alone." Then I said that I wanted to go to Novaya Zemlya. Don't be a fool. Don't go there. A white man has a rough time of it there. There aren't many whaling ships put in there. About the only people who do are a few scoundrels who carry brandy among the natives, whom they poison and rob." I still considered for a moment. "And won't the wolves eat my reindeer?" The captain had set my mind at rest by saying that there were no wolves in New Siberia. When he dropped me on the island in the autumn, he would compensate me for every reindeer that might be lost. And so I took a job as a deckhand on a whaling vessel. The captain's name was Simonov, or something of that kind. I don't exactly remember now. And he was a fine fellow, a rarity among the whaling captains, who, as I afterwards discovered, are often the scourge of the North, and responsible for many ruined lives. Although I knew that the reindeer would not eat the lichens which a human being had touched, I picked a large supply for them and said goodbye to the Eskimos, and had all my belongings brought on board. I stood on the deck, and as soon as the vessel began to move, my eyes followed the wake. I looked towards the south, at the mountains where I had not encountered much luck, but all the same I parted from them with a certain amount of sorrow. A new period in my life was now starting. I was gradually achieving my aim. Within a month or even less, I should be hunting whales in the waters of Novaya Zemlya, and even farther north still. The sailors told me that we were bound for the seas where the ice never melted, and where the ocean flowed like a huge river among the icebergs. So it was with a strange feeling that I said farewell to those mountains. I have never stopped at the Bear Islands since that time, although I have sailed past them very often. From the Bear Islands to New Siberia, the first of the New Siberian group, is close on 400 miles. What worried me was that my reindeer would starve to death before we got there. They refused to touch any of the lichens I had collected, and it was not until the third day that they cautiously picked a small mouthful here and there from underneath. I had plenty to do in those days. I had to learn all about the equipment of a whaling vessel, and have everything explained to me, so that on the first whaling expedition I should not look on and do nothing, but do my share of the work. But as I had sailed before, the mast As I had sailed before the mast years previously, thousands and thousands of miles all over the world, I soon got the hang of it and began to feel at my ease on board. On the third day, there was a sudden shout on deck. "New Siberia on the port bow."